Hello, my fellow addicts. I'm Michael.
And I'm Josh.
And we're doing Danmachi.
Again.
Well, you'll see it. It's Volume 9. It's the start of a new arc. And it's a really good arc. So, you want to talk about... I can talk about the plot and you can cover the characters. That way, you don't have to talk for 6 minutes. But, okay, so the plot is basically there's... You get it at the end of the last book, that there's something weird happening in the dungeon. There's these things classified as irregular monsters, and there's been reports of them stealing armor. There's been even reports of these monsters, adventurers hearing like monsters talk, or like sing, I think, in one case. Yeah. So Bell goes on a quest to eliminate these irregulars. I think it's floor 19. So he goes deep into the dungeon, and it's a pretty big reward, and I think he goes by himself as well.
Well, he goes down with another group because they like have him go with like a seperate group, but then he gets separated from them.
Yeah, but anyway, so it's basically the plot is him encountering these irregular monsters. He may bring one back to become part of, I don't know, his group or whatever. And
I mean, it's in the first chapter. So, like in the very first page, so you could go ahead and say because it's a big part of the story.
Okay, yeah. So he brings one of these monsters, irregular monsters, back to the familiar. That basically he's talking about. Well, I don't know if this is just a monster or what. If it's it has feelings like us. It speaks. What is it? And basically the overarching plot of the book is what could you do with these? Are these individuals, these irregular monsters, like human? Should we treat them like that? How are we going to deal with them?
Does it change the game or the rules of the world?
Yeah,
basically.
And that's what Bell has to struggle with. And then he's thinking about, well, what if I accidentally killed one of these monsters that are smart, in the dungeon before, and it kind of affects his performance in this book a little bit as far as killing monsters.
Just a tad.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit of hesitation. But then you can go into the antagonist, the protagonist, all the different new characters. So.
Okay. Well, there's a lot, but yet there's not a lot. So I'm going to keep it simple here, but there is a lot more that I'm not going to talk about just because they're a little bit cider. But the family that's set up to be the next big opponent, I guess you could say, is Ikelos.
Yeah.
Ikelos. Whatever you want
to
say.
Keep it 2 syllables there.
He's, I would say, he's not a... He's more like a deranged god, I guess you could say, where he's like, he just wants entertainment out of the world. And that's basically all he wants.
You get more about his motivation.
Yeah, you get more motivation, but he's kind of just clear-cut. He's like, I don't really care. Like, they can do bad stuff. I just want to watch. So you get a group that's hinted, not really talked about, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but they're just labeled as the hunters in this book. And you can kind of see that they're after a particular part of monsters, which they may or may not be connected to the irregulars. So the next group that I'm going to talk about is the Xenos, which this is I'm going to put in this name drop because this is the least spoiler way I can think of to not do it. But they're this group that is not irregulars, but not typical monsters. They've been titled as Xenos, and these monsters actually do have names, which the most important ones that we get to see in this book are Leto, and he's a lizard man type monster. We get Ray, which is a harpy, and then we get Gross, which is a gargoyle. So, and they play later on in the later half of the book.
So yeah, I just want to make a clarification. So yeah, they're not irregulars. Basically, what irregulars are for example, if you watch the show, the Minotaur that was on the 5th floor. So it's like a monster, Goliath. Or the Black Goliath. So either it's like a monster that's not where it's supposed to be, a monster that appeared, it's or like stronger, super rare, and it's stronger. So they're not exactly irregulars. They're the Xenos, a different category. Yeah.
But as you'll see, like the guild just calls them irregulars because they don't know anything quite yet, or do they?
Yeah, that's the question.
But the next big character that you get to introduce really early on is Ween, which we don't have a name for at the beginning part of the book, but we soon get a name for, probably in the 2nd chapter or so. And she's just, I don't know how it's these names kill me. The Vovri, I don't remember. They're supposed to be a dragon, like a dragon.
Wyvern.
Yeah.
What dragon kind
Yeah,
of.
where it's like they're human on the top half, and then they have like a dragon, like they're the
Arms and
serpent
legs,
dragon, they're like the Eastern dragon. So it's like serpent. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
they don't have legs; they just have feet. So and then wings and stuff. But she may or may not have those other features. But and then the only other one that's I guess you'll get to see the guild, the brains behind the guild, like the guy who runs the guild, which I'm gonna keep that because it's plays into a big part. But you get to see him and then like his second in command and how they interact with the dungeon as well as the city. So, but that's all I'm gonna say with keeping it as spoiler free as I can. But Michael, what were some of your favorite parts of that you can say?
I can say.
Yeah, that you can say.
The battle between the leader of the Xenos and Bell. It's towards the. I think it's in the middle of the book, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's actually really entertaining. You get to see something different, especially when Bell uses Argonaut and uses all of his powers to fight. In this book, I think he's level 3, I believe.
Like middle tier 3?
Yeah, middle to tier 3. So he's actually like, kind of an advanced adventurer. It's kind of a weird system.
He's like a middle tier, I guess. He's not first.
Yeah, he's not first tier. He's like second tier adventure. I think is how the classification goes. I like that fight. I like there's in the calm before the storm. There's probably like a week where they're hanging out with Ween. That's pretty cool. You get to see like how the Familia reacts and how like everyone. Some people are more accepting than others, and then you like understand like how what. In the last book, we get a bigger picture of what Lily's all about. Lily's all about protecting the Familia and protecting Belle, and it's kind of in this book.
Capitalizes on her final decision on what her role is.
Yeah. So you get to see what her opinion of the situation is and how that changes over the course of the book, and how there's other people in this world who find out more about the Xenos, and you get to see how their reactions are different in this book.
Yeah, I think one of the things that impressed me most about this volume is just how well they pull off so many new introductions of characters. I mean, they've introduced new characters at a pretty good gradual pace throughout the other volumes, but this one we get like a boatload of them. And it just intrigues me how they have so many characters, but you still, at least me, I care about most of the ones shown, or like ones where I'm like, oh, he's a dick, or he like, oh, I don't trust him. But like most of them are like, oh yeah, I could totally accept this guy because he's like so cool.
Yeah,
and it's just a great thing about this, and it just really attests to how many storylines and characters that they're able to juggle, especially with in this volume. There's some. I mean, I guess we already kind of said it, but it just offers like a great twist to the story because up until this point, we've focused on, the dungeon's there. It's like a means for them to level up, but the main bulk is, been focusing on people. And then now we're getting to this point where we're dealing with the monsters, more on the monster side, and then we're really asking questions that we never thought we would be asking before. And that's just an interesting aspect. It's kind of like reverse zombie stories that go on, because like zombie stories, like you'll have like the zombie problem, but then you'll focus on like the people threat, and then now it's kind of like the reverse of that. You were focused on people and what everybody's going on, the different factions around, and now you're switching to something that's always been there, but you didn't know it had a threat that maybe some people never thought was possible.
Yeah, and I think we talked in the last couple of reviews, we've talked about what's the overarching theme. And I think the theme of this one is, are humans in this world morally superior to the Xenos?
Yeah.
And there's a faction, I mean, you'll get, that's basically the entire arc. But I would just like to say that, people in the world are like, well, the Xenos did this or they did that, or what if they hurt one person?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, yeah, but have you seen what the humans have done in this world?
Yeah, like they go into the day, like it's their day job to kill monsters. So
not only kill monsters, but kill other humans. Yeah. So it is kind of an interesting question, and I love what Belle's character is in this entire arc. And in book 9, you get to start to see his heart change about like what the dungeon is, what monsters are, what Xenos are, and what it means to be a hero. Is he going to be a hero for the humans? Is he going to be a hero for Eyes? Is he going to be a hero for his familia, or is he going to be a hero for the world, including the Xenos?
And what I think is so great is, like, in Volume 6, when he's going up against Apollo in the war game, like, we get to see in Volume 6, we see, he's doing stuff that anybody would do, right? I mean, he's standing with people in his family, the people closest to him, which, who wouldn't do that? So, I mean, like, yes, he still does stuff that's very noble, that's, very selfless, but it's something that you could picture anybody really doing in that situation. In Volume 7, you see, just kind of what kind of hero he's going to be. He's willing to risk his life for somebody that he doesn't know very well, somebody that's in a completely different circumstance that he could just turn his head to, and he faces, odds that could kill him in an instant for that cause. And so you get a peek of what he is. In the later books, you see him continue that path, and then he's brought up this question again, like, how far, like, he already knows what his stance is, but he's, in this book, it's trying to figure out how far can I take that stance in terms of, like, my abilities, but also, like, how could I live with myself either way,
Yeah, and something that, as someone who's read a lot of books and watched a lot of shows in this kind of genre, the general trend is, it's a good guy. I gotta get the air quotes in there. He's a pretty good guy. It's like he's generically good, and that's not Bell at all. He's actually a hero, and this is the start of him being a hero, at least in my perspective, in Book 9. So.
Yeah, and it's got a wild ride. Like, I think the most exciting thing about this book is just the possibilities it opens and where the story goes off from here, because there's a lot of different directions it can go. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the world. Not so much the story, because I think it's going to be intriguing either way. But for that, it rates pretty highly with me. But I don't know. Do you want me to go into my recommendation?
Yeah, let's just go into the ratings.
So for me, I'm still going to label it a worth it. This is getting into some great stuff, but I want to keep it low because obviously there's a lot of volumes that we still have to cover. It's nowhere near being done, so I want to save some breathing room here. But this one, if I have to stress it, like, this is like the highest, of that. Like, it's. I guess I know for Michael, it's probably gonna be lower tier of the other one, next one up. But for me, it's it's especially for the beginning parts of stories, like, that's not where the bulk of the action and the excitement happens. So since it's just starting off, I'm gonna rate it this lower one, but I still think it's great, and you definitely don't want to skip this arc, because just judging from what I've seen so far, it's my favorite arc so far.
Yeah, and I think as far as my rating, that's kind of a hard thing to do. We're working on this new system, and we're kind of working out the kinks of it.
Yeah.
Because no rating system is good if you only use one category.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I think this is an FFA, just because you get to see the heart of Bell more than any other book, I think, so far. You get to see how he is, how cool of a guy he is, and what stands he'll take for the world, and how unselfish he is when it comes to the end of he'll help the helpless regardless of who regardless of who it is. Yeah, so I think it's low tier FFA if I had to give it a rating, and it's up until this point, I think it's one of my favorites. Book 7 is up there too, as being up there as being one of my favorites. But I think Book 9 it's probably the best start of an arc that we've really had in Danmachi.
And I think it's probably the most interesting one so far, just because it just flips.
Yeah, I don't know if it happened to you, but in this book and in this arc in general, but specifically in this book, I've several times I was asking myself, well, what would I do in this situation? Would I stand with the Xenos, or would I,
I think it's so tough,
them?
because obviously when you're first addressed to the situation, you feel sympathetic and you can relate to that situation. I mean, obviously, if you look back at the other circumstances he's been in, where when he was basically in a lower tier familia, like, everybody kind of looked at them, kind of like shunned them. Maybe not shunned them, but looked down on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so he can kind of relate to that isolated group a little bit. Obviously, not to the same extent, but a little bit. But as far as me personally, it's so hard because I feel like that's where you draw the line of what matters most to you. Does it matter the people around you, or does it matter your stances, your morals, like what you think is right? Because personally, I think it's like you want to do both, but in a situation like this, you may not be able to do both. And so I think Bell made the right decision, because obviously it's always nice to make new allies. If you're talking about it from a tactical standpoint, if you're talking about just a moral thing, like how could he live with himself if he didn't help somebody that is meets all the requirements that he set for other people to help? So I think if I was in the same situation, had the same background, I would pick the same one. But it is interesting though, because and you could relate this to stances that happen today too. Like, do you neglect a certain people group just because they have hard times but they don't connect with you? So it's interesting. But yeah, I think it's even like it atones to like just our rating too, because it's so good that it asks you questions like this. So that's part of its charm.
So yeah, I mean that pretty much finishes up our review of Danmachi Volume 9. I almost said a different number.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to 10. I promise. But yeah, for this review, if you have any other, we'll have a bunch of other content coming out on the channel, so check that out. We got a weekly podcast. We'll put that in our description as well. That has something to do with anime. I always keep the light novels in there for you guys because I know you like this kind of content. And we'll be seeing you guys later. Later, Addicts.
Later.